is Eli Machin, and today I would like to talk to you about the brain and shame and its effects on the brain and what happens here. So let's look at that for just a minute together. We all have components of our brain. I'll start with, we all have an alligator. That is the amygdala. We all have the monkey part of the brain. That is the hippocampus. That's the RAM drive of the brain. And then we all have that scientist part of our brain, the higher thinking. Now, the idea of this came from Dr. Ted Klontz. You can read it in his book, Mind Over Money. I highly recommend it, by the way. But anyway, this is kind of the concept of, I'm teeing off of with his work here. Now, we know that the amygdala is fully developed at birth. It's about the size of a pea. It's not real big, but it's really, really fast, and it's always cranking. It's always active. It's always observing what's going on in the environment so that its job is to check out and look for danger. So it scans for danger. It's always on high alert. It's not smart, but very, very fast. It's just not a lot of brain functioning capacity in there. But we do know at birth that thing is developed, and when you come out of the womb, then it's cooking. It hollers, it lets you know to what you need to do so that you don't die. I mean, its job is to keep you alive. Now, it observes for danger always. It scans. Now, there are guys that are in recovery, there are people in recovery who have an overactive amygdala. I mean, they're always scanning for danger. We know that this area is overactive if there's been trauma. We also know that it's overactive if there's been abuse. So the likelihood of any of you that are watching this right now that are either working with clients who have been through abuse, either childhood or adult abuse or trauma, then this area of the brain is going to be hyperactive because it's really scanning. It's really been ramped up to look out for danger. So just to let you know this, a lot of times guys that go through a lot of high level of anxiety and have been self-medicating that anxiety, it's because of the amygdala. Now, the hippocampus is the next piece. That's the monkey part of the brain. That's the size of it right here. That's just a regular generic seahorse, and that's about the size of your hippocampus. It's a little bit bigger than the amygdala. Its main function is like the RAM drive on your computer. It takes in data and at night during your sleep disperses it and compartmentalizes it across the brain. It's really the part about that it really is active during your REM sleep or dreaming. And so those things, we also know that the hippocampus can get locked up. Trauma gets locked into the hippocampus. And so we can end up doing repetitive behaviors because of trauma. Repetitive nightmares and repetitive anxieties and fears, phobias can come from this. Basically locked up in the hippocampus area. Now, well, I call it the monkey part of the brain. It's fully developed by 10. It's responsible for regulating memory. That's what I was talking about. It takes all the information, input that you had during each day, and then during your REM sleep, compartmentalizes and sends it out, unless there's trauma. If there's trauma to emotional, spiritual, sexual, physical trauma, then a lot of times that hippocampus won't process it. It keeps it in present memory. So it's always in your reoccurring nightmares and things like this. It's lightning quick, learned responses. And its learned responses can be any one of these. The fight, the flight, the freeze, the feed. That means that, like, if you don't know if you're going to live long enough or get enough food again or get another time to eat, then you eat. And a lot of times we talk about medicating, emotionally eating. A lot of times is basically part of this part of the brain. And then to fornicate or to reproduce. A lot of times when there's, there are situations where with trauma, high risk behaviors, there's acting out that goes along with this, and this is the component that goes with that. Now, bottom line, the hippocampus' job is to do this. It talks real quickly, real fast with the amygdala. The amygdala says there's danger. The hippocampus has got 1 or 2 buttons, and it's going to push. We all have 1 or 2 key buttons that we will use in our life. If I am backed into a corner and I feel like there's no way out, then my first button is fight. I mean, I grew up as a kid having a fight every time I moved, every time I went somewhere. It's like I knew there was somebody going to come along and pick a fight just to see who was going to be the tough kid, who's this new kid. So when I get cornered, one of my initial reactions is to come out fighting. Another one would be is that sometimes I go through I call a brain freeze. I mean, basically when there is someone who's in my face and as appears in authority, then I'll lock up, my brain will lock up, and I can't think. Then later I'm going, oh, why didn't I say this? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I feel this? Well, I could have said this, and I didn't. A lot of times that's because I'm in brain lock. I'm frozen. Part of that whole deal is as the amygdala, the alligator, is scanning for danger and sees something that feels dangerous, it alerts the monkey part, the hippocampus, and it pushes a button. Now, suppose that I was tromping around as a caveman, and all of a sudden I pick up or sense that there is a Tyrannosaurus Rex breathing down my neck. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to decide whether he looks hungry or not hungry. All I need to do is run, or I need to freeze. Whatever I need to do it really quick, or I'm going to be snack food for this Tyrannosaurus Rex. That's the purpose. Now, the brain doesn't care. In these two components, the brain is doing what it's supposed to do. That's the way we were designed to do. Now, as we move on along, what we'd like to get to in the part of the brain is the scientist, the higher level of thinking. Now, the cortex, the higher level of thinking and reasoning, is fully developed at the age of 25. That's why when they draft at 18. I know when I got my draft number back in the 60s, and it was like at 18, I didn't figure I was going to die. I'm going to go to Southeast Asia on a vacation trip by the government. Now, most of us at 18 didn't think. We always thought in terms of somebody else dying, not necessarily us. That's because our cortex is not fully developed. That higher level of thinking is not fully developed or functioning, and it's usually later for men than it is for women. So this is the area where there is the reasoning, the logic, and all of that is developed. Now, what we also know, research tells us that when there's certain things that go on, we end up being, if we're confronted with a hostile force, we're in full panic mode, our hair's on fire. You can see where I've had that problem. You know, it's that our hair's on fire. We're in panic, anxiety, we're fearing for our life at some deeper level, or we've got something that's just ragging us, shame is ragging us on. That trap door shuts to the higher level of thinking. In other words, our brain will not even bother to access what we know reasonably we should be doing. It shuts the door, and we will then move off into what the monkey decides us to do. We'll either freeze, we'll flight, we'll run, we'll exit a relationship, we'll exit a room, we'll get out of whatever situation, we'll quit a job, we'll fight, we'll bicker, we'll pick fights with our spouses, we will pick fights with others. It doesn't always mean that we fist fight. It could be that we verbally fight or we emotionally fight. And then we medicate with food, or we fornicate, we sexually act out. Even in marriage, we can medicate using sex when this button is being pushed. Now that when danger lurks, these are the things that we typically go to until we get through our recovery and learning through our recovery how to change the buttons and give this monkey another button to push, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, or we've talked about in our triggers and rituals and our tools for recovery, is that you give this monkey other tools to use, different buttons to push to where you can do it. We talked about that around, making calls, making a call to your sponsor, go to a meeting, get up and move around. We'll cover those over and over throughout this whole year with you. But what you're doing in your recovery, and why we say keep doing it, it works if you work it, is because you're training this little monkey to do something different than some of these that don't always work. Okay? Now, the brain thinks in simple terms for the most part. Those lower parts of the brain's survival for the brain is success. You're still alive, or you wouldn't be watching me. I'm still alive. So the brain says, what you've done worked. You're still alive. It doesn't measure the quality of all that. It just measures the fact that you're still alive. Its job in the amygdala and the hippocampus is to keep you alive, and you're alive. Now, what's happened, though, or you wouldn't be in this program right now, is that you've realized that some of the things you've used to medicate, to stay alive, is not working for you very well. You might be alive, but you're barely alive. As a matter of fact, you're just surviving. And if you want to thrive, if you want to connect in relationships, if you want to show up with people, significant people in your life, then it's not just survival you want. You want to push through this fear, this resistance that comes over us. And when we feel like that we got to get, when we're asked or invited to show up our spouse or our children or other individuals in recovery mainly, is where we begin to learn this, is that it's very scary. And so we've got to push past this. The brain is saying, hey, don't do this, survival is good, and you're trying to push on past this. This is that resistance of you trying to get somewhere different. Now, the question I just asked you is, are you still alive? Yes. You're still alive. Now, the key would be is that, are you still alive and have you succeeded? Are you even sober? And so success for us will be revamped in this program of showing up 365 days in a year, so that you learning how to show up, learning how to be vulnerable and transparent with others in your life, so that there'll be a point in your life where, not only are you alive, but you're thriving in relationships. And that's our goal. Now, these are things we know. We know that the trap door can close instantly. In other words, if there's somebody that's put you in a corner verbally or emotionally or whatever other way, that trap door shuts and you're not going to access any kind of thinking. We also know that the trap door can shut gradually because of some of the pre-trigger states that we've talked about in the past. You can be angry, lonely, hungry, tired, bored, stressed. Those things in relationship, or the nitpicking in relationships, or the fear of somebody abandoning you, or you being left, depending on how old you are at the time that happens, that trap door can shut gradually over time. It could be days, it could be weeks, until a certain point that door is shut. Now, once it's shut, you're not accessing the things that you really know, the things you've learned in recovery, the things you've learned in your program that you've been through. You just don't access it. And you're going to go back to some of those old things that the monkey part of the brain only has a couple buttons, and it's going to start pushing. We also know, research tells us that it takes about 20 minutes to open the trap door again, to allow yourself to access that higher level of thinking. So one of the things that we're going to talk about somewhere down the road is that when you're in relationships and there's an argument or a discourse that's going on that increases your anxiety or fear, then that trap door is going to shut. And I don't care, your conversation is done. You're not getting anywhere. So we often recommend, I do in counseling with couples, is that let's take some time out. Because basically what happens if a couple gets into fighting, the trap door is shut on both of them. They're back at some early age in life trying to survive. Their brain is telling them they're going to die. And so I tell them to build in a timeout so that you can give time for your brain to open back up to access all the things you know. Like perfectly brilliant people I work with, that it's sometimes when they get odds with each other, that trap door shuts, and I've got 2 children sitting there trying to fight it out. And ordinarily they're brilliant people. They're professionals. They've achieved incredible things. They're bright. And yet that part of the brain is not being accessed when that trap door shut. Give it time to open up. Okay? Now, that's all I want to talk about right now around the brain. We're going to bring it up later. We'll have it in other conversations. Knowing this will help you kind of mitigate some of that anxiety and realize I've got to work with my brain, not against it. And I can't keep medicating. I've got to move on through it and keep that trap door shut. Thank you.